I'm an economic theorist. In a recent project with a colleague of mine, we looked at the role of narratives in public opinion politics. For us, a narrative is simply an account of what causes outcomes. For example, there is much talk of conflicting narratives about the causes of recent inflation. So what makes some of these narratives more popular than others, and how do these false narratives affect political dynamics? So to illustrate our theoretical approach, let's imagine a political debate over trade policy. Suppose, for the sake of the example, that there is a true narrative represented by this causal diagram. As you can see, technological changes affect both imports and employment. Trade policy affects imports, but it doesn't affect employment. So if voters buy this true narrative, they'll oppose trade restrictions, which only hurt consumers without having any effect on workers. Now imagine that politicians start promoting a false narrative, saying that imports have a direct causal effect on employment, for example in this diagram. If voters buy this false narrative, they're open to the thought that trade policy might actually help workers. So which of these two narratives wins? We made a theoretical argument based on two assumptions. Assumption one, false narratives generate wrong beliefs by misinterpreting actual correlations that exist in the data. For example, suppose that in the data, lower imports are associated with higher employment. The false narrative will conclude that low imports cause high employment. It confuses correlation with a causal effect. Our second assumption is that voters are attracted to hopeful narratives. That is, narratives that promise high payoffs given the beliefs that they generate. We showed that these assumptions together imply a cyclical political dynamic in our example. When the true narrative prevails, governments allow free trade. This creates observational patterns, which the false narrative wrongly interprets as an opportunity to help workers via trade restrictions. When, as a result, governments restrict trade, the same patterns that made the false narrative popular in the first place disappear, and the true narrative becomes dominant again. And so we cycle back and forth between the two narratives and their conflicting policies, free trade versus protectionism. This example conveys a simple theoretical insight. Populist narratives are empowered by opportunistic misreading of data. At the same time, they're balanced by periods of so-called rational policies. Of course, this is just an example, but it shows how economic theory can shed light on the role of false narratives in politics.